Welcome back. So far we've learned a bit about what front-end development entails and where it fits into the project, but before we jump into code, it's worth taking a break to discuss philosophy. The philosophical approaches to front-end web development can really be boiled down into two major camps. The first of those is graceful degradation. This concept came to web design from the engineering world, and the general idea was that you could provide a degraded or lower quality service or no service to some people as long as you don't cause any major errors. Following on that concept, the web design community focused our time and our energy on modern browsers and paid little to no mind to older browsers, often leaving testing on those browsers to the very end of the project and fixing only the most egregious errors. If a browser proved particularly problematic, we might outright block it and present the user with a message telling them they needed to use a different browser. Trust me when I say you don't want your customers feeling like this little kid. There are so many instances in which a user has no control over the browser they use. It could be because of ignorance or financial means, or because their company has a browser locked down and they can only use that corporate standard one. To deny users access to content or the ability to accomplish key tasks like viewing their bank account simply because their browser is not the one that you want them to have is just plain rude. In some cases, it might even be grounds for a lawsuit. Anyway, around about 2003, Steve Champion of the Web Standards Project proposed a new way of approaching web design, and he dubbed it progressive enhancement. The idea behind progressive enhancement is that you're creating a website that doesn't have any technological restrictions. In other words, you are starting with the baseline and enhancing the experience based on the capabilities of the browser. It's about focusing on the content and the core tasks, and then expanding out and adding more enhancements as you have the ability to do so. If you're a comedy fan like I am, Mitch Hedberg has a great quote, "I like an escalator because an escalator can never break, it can only become stairs." In many ways, progressive enhancement is the same concept. Here we have again the square IE8 version and the rounded cornered IE9 version, and this would be a progressive enhancement. The IE8 browser doesn't understand rounded corners, IE9 does, so IE9 gets the rounded corners and IE8 doesn't, and that's all right. Now, I'm a big proponent of progressive enhancement, and I like to use an analogy of the continuum from a peanut to a peanut M&M. Here on the left, we have the peanut, which is a rich and tasty treat, and as long as you don't have a peanut allergy, it's a perfectly acceptable snack. If you wrap it in chocolate, now all of a sudden you have what we refer to in the States at least as a goober. And a goober is so much better than just a plain peanut because it's got chocolate on it. Now when you add the candy shell to turn it into a peanut M&M, it becomes amazing. But the thing to keep in mind here is that any of these are valid snack options. But in the steps along the way, moving from the peanut to the peanut M&M, we've created better and better experiences for the people who are eating them. In the same way, we should strive to create better and better experiences for people based on their browser capabilities or device capabilities. Now, these two philosophies are actually intrinsically related because progressive enhancement is actually a very specialized form of graceful degradation. All progressively enhanced websites will automatically degrade gracefully. The same cannot be said of all sites that gracefully degrade. Not all of them are progressively enhanced. Andrew White tweeted that progressive enhancement is an escalator that becomes stairs, whereas graceful degradation is building a lift and then having to add stairs when it breaks. And I think that's a pretty good upgrade of Mitch Hedberg's analogy. Now, since we're talking about relationships here, I'll also bring up that when you're looking at two concepts of responsive design and mobile first, where the two of those intersect is actually progressive enhancement as well. Because responsive design approached from a mobile first standpoint is progressively enhancing the visual design of a site based on the amount of screen real estate available to the user. Now, the last thing that I want to share with you with respect to this chapter is a little bit of a story. So here we have two different projects that my company worked on. The first of which we were specifically instructed to use graceful degradation as our philosophical approach. In the second, we were asked to use progressive enhancement as our philosophical approach. In the first, we were asked to target just one single browser, and that was the Chrome browser, because we were building a Chrome app. In the second project, we were targeting 4 specific browsers. Now, once these projects were completed and had been out on the internet for a while, each of these clients came back to us to upgrade the site in order to add more browser support. In the case of the first project, they wanted to add 2 new browsers. In the case of the second project, they wanted to add 1,400 new browsers. Now, when we went to do this, what we discovered was that with the graceful degradation approach, it actually took us 40% of the original budget to add support for 2 new browsers, because we had built it solely expecting to have that single one browser. In the case of Project B, however, we had built with progressive enhancement in mind, so we were automatically able to reach more browsers with less headaches. So we had given them a budget that was about 1/3 of the original project, and we ended up coming in at half of that. So for 1/6 the cost of the original project, we were able to add 1,400 more devices to their support matrix, which is pretty awesome. Progressive enhancement just works. Now, throughout this course, I'll be approaching things from a progressive enhancement standpoint because that really is the gold standard for how you should be building on the web today. Well, this wraps up lesson 1 of the course, and so I've got an assignment for you. In order to ease the process of putting your files online, we're going to use GitHub. And so what I want you to do is actually create a GitHub page and get that all set up in order to be able to post your content and share that in the forum. You can get an account at github.com, and if you go to pages.github.com, they have a complete walkthrough on how to use GitHub pages for hosting. The other assignment I have for you is to figure out what the subject is that you want to build your site about. And I want you to look specifically on Wikipedia for that content. I want you to look for enough content on a subject to fill at least 5 pages and have a handful of images. You could do a project on whatever you like. I particularly chose to look up cuttlefish, and I found a treasure trove of content there about cuttlefish, a bunch of different sections that I could use as pages, and a bunch of different images, and even some videos. As I mentioned earlier in this lesson, my site is up and available at aarongustafson.github.io/iheartcuttlefish, and you can view that on your desktop browser or even on your mobile device. Well, that wraps it for lesson 1. I hope to see you in lesson 2, where we'll start digging into HTML markup. See you soon.